The dust of my father's life settled into two things: a worn leather-bound journal filled with his quiet, looping script, and the deed to a plot of land that everyone agreed was worthless. He left me nothing else. No coin, no house, not even a horse to carry me away from the memory of him. Just 50 acres of cracked earth under a punishing sun, and at its heart, the thing that had consumed the last decade of his life, a deep, stone-lined well that had never yielded a single drop of water. My companion in this inheritance was Kaiser, my German shepherd, whose warm presence against my leg was the only thing that felt real. He watched me with knowing, amber eyes as I stood at the edge of the gaping hole, the paper in my hand crinkling with the dry heat. In town, at the mercantile, the proprietor had looked at the deed, then at me, and given a low chuckle that sounded like rocks grinding together. "Your father chased a ghost, girl," Mr. Hemlock had said, his face a mask of pity and impatience. "Dug himself a fine grave, is all. That land's a boneyard. Always has been." He pushed a small sack of flour and some dried meat across the counter, a final act of charity for the orphan of the town fool. I didn't say anything. I just took the supplies, felt the weight of them in my arms, and walked back to the only place on earth that was mine. The well was a perfect circle of disappointment, its mouth ringed with stones my father had hauled and set himself. It was a monument to failure, a deep, dark throat that had swallowed his hope whole. And now, it was my legacy. The sky had been a searing, indifferent blue for weeks, but that afternoon, it began to change. A bruised purple crept in from the northern horizon, a slow-moving stain that bled across the vast emptiness. The air, once thick with heat, grew thin and sharp, carrying a scent I knew from my father's cautionary tales, the clean, sterile smell of a deep cold. Kaiser felt it too. He stopped panting, his ears flattening slightly as he pressed closer to my side, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. A blizzard. Not just a flurry of snow, but one of the great white storms that could erase the landscape, burying fences and landmarks, and freezing a person solid in the space of an afternoon. I had no cabin, no barn, not even a proper tent. My shelter was a lean-to of scavenged lumber and canvas, a pathetic shield against a summer rain, let alone a wall of ice and snow. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to take hold, but my father's voice echoed in my memory, calm and steady from 100 fireside lessons. "When the world tries to bury you, Anna, you find the deepest hole and you pull it in over your head." He had been talking about trouble, about gossip and debt, but standing there, with the first icy needles of wind stinging my cheeks, his words took on a terrifyingly literal meaning. I looked from the flimsy lean-to to the dark, silent mouth of the well. It was a grave, Mr. Hemlock had said. But it was also shelter. It was deep. It was out of the wind. It was the only choice I had. The first flakes of snow were not gentle drifters but hard, tiny pellets that struck my face and hands like sand. The world was losing its color, fading to a stark palette of gray and white. There was no time for doubt. I worked with a frantic, focused energy, my breath pluming in the frigid air. The rope was thick and coarse, a lifeline my father had used to lower himself into the darkness day after day. I tied it securely around the sturdiest of the ring stones, testing the knot again and again with my full weight. My meager supplies went first. I lowered the sack of flour, the packet of dried meat, 2 heavy wool blankets, and the precious lantern, its reservoir full of oil. They vanished into the blackness, their descent marked only by the rasp of the rope sliding over the stone. Then came Kaiser. He whined, his trust in me warring with his instinct. "It's all right," I murmured, my voice tight with fear. "It's the only way. We go together." I fashioned a harness for him from a shorter length of rope and carefully, with his paws scrabbling for purchase against the stone, I lowered him into the abyss. His frightened yelps echoed up until they were silenced by a soft thud. Now it was my turn. My hands, already numb, gripped the rope. The snow was coming faster now, a dizzying curtain that obscured the horizon. I swung my legs over the edge, my boots scraping against the cold, unyielding stone. For a moment, I hung there, suspended between the roaring storm and the silent earth, a tiny, insignificant thing in the face of nature's fury. Then I let go of the world above and began to climb down into my father's failure. The descent was a journey through geology and memory. The stones, slick with a fine layer of frost, were cold and rough against my palms. I moved slowly, methodically, finding footholds my father's boots had worn into the cylindrical wall over years of his own travels into the dark. The roaring of the wind became a muted hum, a distant beast prowling the world I had left behind. After what felt like an eternity, my boots touched solid ground. The air was still and intensely cold, thick with the scent of dry clay and stone dust. I fumbled for the lantern, my fingers clumsy and stiff, and with a strike of a match, a small, golden circle of light pushed back the absolute blackness. Kaiser was there, huddled and shivering but unharmed, his tail giving a weak thump against the ground. We were at the bottom of a stone tube, perhaps 40 feet deep and 10 feet across. The walls rose up around us, a perfect, man-made cavern. Looking up, I could see the opening, a churning circle of grey sky and swirling snow. It felt a universe away. We were entombed, safe from the wind but trapped in the heart of the cold. As I unrolled the blankets, my hand brushed against a loose stone in the wall near the floor. It shifted. Curiosity overriding my fear, I pried at it. Behind it, nestled in a small, carved-out hollow, was a flat tin box, sealed with wax. My father's handwriting, faint but unmistakable, was scratched into the lid, for Anna. "When you're ready to see." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was no accident. He had known I would end up here. He had left this for me. With trembling hands, I broke the wax seal and pried open the lid. The contents were not what I expected. There was no money, no map to a hidden claim. Instead, there were tightly rolled sheaves of paper, covered in my father's precise, intricate drawings. They were not sketches of dreams but detailed schematics, cross-sections of the earth, diagrams of rock strata, and calculations that filled every margin. And there was a letter. "My dearest Anna," it began, "if you are reading this, the world has pushed you to the place where my work ended. I am sorry for the hardship, but I am not sorry for the inheritance. People think I was digging for a river. They were wrong. A river is a fool's hope out here. I was looking for something slower, something deeper. I was looking for the earth's breath," he went on to explain, in language that was both scientific and poetic, his theory. He believed that deep within the porous layers of rock, the earth held moisture not in veins, but in its very bones. He believed this moisture could be coaxed out, gathered, and collected, not by digging a single deep hole, but by creating a network of tiny channels that would allow the pressure of the earth itself to weep its hidden water into a central point. This well wasn't a failure to find water. It was the heart of a collection system that he had never had the chance to finish. It was a beginning. A profound, aching love for him filled me, a love mixed with the grief of misunderstanding. He wasn't a fool. He was a visionary. The blizzard raged for 6 days. Above, the world was being scoured and buried, but in our stone sanctuary, time was measured by the slow burn of lantern oil and the rhythm of my work. My father's plans were my scripture. His tools, a small handpick and a trowel, were also hidden behind a loose stone wrapped in oilcloth. They felt like an extension of his own hands. The schematics showed a series of hairline fissures radiating from the well's base, channels he had identified but had not cleared. He had marked them on the well wall with faint chalk lines. In the flickering lantern light, I began to follow his map. The work was slow, grueling, and intensely focused. I would chip away at the compacted clay and shale, my shoulders aching, my fingers raw. Each tap of the pick was a conversation with my father, a continuation of his last, silent effort. Kaiser would watch me, his head on his paws, a quiet and patient observer. He seemed to understand that something important was happening in our cold, dark shelter. I wasn't just digging. I was excavating my father's soul, understanding the quiet obsession that had driven him. He hadn't been chasing a ghost, he had been listening to a whisper from the earth itself, a promise that no one else had the patience to hear. I cleared one channel, then another, a network of tiny, hollow veins spreading out from where I sat today. I had no idea if it would work, but for the first time since he died, I felt a sense of purpose that was stronger than my grief. I was no longer an orphan in a grave, I was an apprentice in a workshop. When the snow finally stopped, the silence was absolute. I climbed out of the well into a world that had been remade. The land was a vast, unbroken sheet of white, dazzling under a pale sun. The air was so cold and clean it hurt to breathe. My lean-to was gone, completely buried. Without the well, we would have been gone, too. That first ascent back into the light was a rebirth. I was not the same girl who had climbed down in desperation. The well was no longer a pit of despair, it was the center of my world, a place of hidden knowledge and future promise. The work continued through the thaw of spring and into the heat of summer. Every day, I would spend hours in the cool darkness, clearing the channels my father had mapped. It was a slow and patient craft, a meditation in stone and earth. In town, Mr. Hemlock would watch me buy my meager supplies. Still living in that hole, girl, he asked one day, his tone less mocking and more bewildered. I simply nodded, my face smudged with dirt. I didn't have the words to explain what I was doing, and he didn't have the imagination to understand. Then, one sweltering afternoon in late August, after a rare, brief thunderstorm had passed, I went down into the well for my daily work. And I saw it. On the packed clay floor at the very center, there was a dark, circular patch of moisture, no bigger than my palm. It wasn't a puddle, not even a seep. But it was there. I knelt and touched it. The earth was cool and damp. It was the first drop. The promise fulfilled. The years that followed were measured in the slow, miraculous spread of that dampness. The patch became a seep, then a place where a single drop would fall every few minutes, its splash echoing in the stillness. That single drop became a constant, patient trickle, a tiny silver thread of water emerging from the stone. It was more precious than gold. I dug a small basin for it to collect in, and every day I would haul up buckets of clean, cold water. My father had been right. He had found the earth's breath, and I had given it a voice. I built a small, sturdy cabin over the mouth of the well, using the stones my father had excavated. The well was now my cellar, my spring, the cool, beating heart of my home. With the water, I did what everyone said was impossible on that land. I planted a garden. Just a small plot at first, with hardy greens and root vegetables. I watered it carefully, using every drop with reverence. And it grew. In the cracked, barren earth, a patch of vibrant green appeared. It was an act of defiance against the sun, against the dust, against the memory of failure. My small homestead, once a symbol of destitution, was becoming an oasis. Kaiser, now graying at the muzzle, would lie in the shade of the broad squash leaves, a silent guardian of our impossible creation. The land was no longer a boneyard. It was alive, and its life flowed from the darkness, from the very place everyone had dismissed as empty. The change did not go unnoticed. During a long dry spell the following summer, when the creeks ran low and the pastures for miles around turned brown and brittle, my small patch of green was a jewel. People in town began to talk. They had seen me haul my produce to the mercantile, my vegetables plump and vibrant when theirs were withered on the stalk. One day, Mr. Hemlock rode out to my land. He stopped a short distance from my cabin, his expression one of profound disbelief. He looked at the garden, at the sturdy stone structure I had built, and at the simple but effective pulley system over the well. He walked over, his boots crunching on the dry ground just beyond my irrigated soil. "How?" was all he could manage to say. I didn't answer right away. I just lowered a bucket and drew up clear, cool water, offering him a dipper. He drank it, his eyes never leaving my face. He looked at the well, then back at me. "Your father," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all its old arrogance. "He wasn't a fool, was he?" "No," I said softly. "He was just patient." He nodded slowly, a lifetime of certainty dissolving in that single cup of water. "He was the first. Others followed, not for charity, but for trade, for a bit of water for their ailing livestock, for the secret to the green that grew from my dust. They stopped seeing the town fool's daughter. They started to see a woman who knew the land in a way they never had. I stand here now, by the stone ring of the well that became my salvation and my home. The sun is setting, casting long shadows from the small grove of trees that I planted a decade ago, trees that should not be able to grow here. Kaiser is gone, buried on a small rise overlooking the garden, but a new pup, descended from his line, sleeps at my feet. My father's journal sits on the table inside my cabin, its pages filled with his knowledge, and now, with my own. The well was his last gift, a legacy that looked like nothing. It was an inheritance not of a thing, but of a process. It taught me that the most valuable resources are never on the surface. It taught me that what appears to be an end, a dry hole, a failed life, a crushing loss, is often just a doorway to a different kind of beginning. It taught me that survival is not about finding a resource, but about creating one. So I ask you to look at the empty spaces in your own life. The failed ventures, the abandoned dreams, the places where you dug and found nothing. Do not be so quick to call them graves. Perhaps they are not empty at all. Perhaps they are just waiting. Waiting for you to climb down into the darkness, to find the hidden map, to begin the patient work, and to listen, not for the roar of a river, but for the quiet, steady whisper of the earth's own breath.